Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
I held my breath as the bus pulled away from the village. My two sisters were already asleep beside me, their heads resting against the window. The road was long and quiet, and I watched the trees disappear behind us. That place had never felt like home. It was more like a waiting room where we stayed until someone remembered us. But no one ever did. We grew up in a foster home on the edge of a small town. It wasn't the worst place, but it wasn't kind either. The couple who raised us gave us food, clothes, and rules. That was all. They never hugged us. They never asked how we felt. I learned early not to cry when I was sad. I kept my feelings inside and watched over my sisters instead. I am the oldest. My name is Lena. My sisters, Mira and Elin, are 3 and 5 years younger. When I turned 18, the foster care ended for me. I packed a small bag, said goodbye to the woman who raised us, and promised my sisters that I would wait for them. One day, I told them, we will leave together. I kept that promise. When Elin turned 18, we left together. I had worked as a cleaner in a hotel and saved just enough for 3 bus tickets and 1 old suitcase. We had no plan, only one goal: to find something better than what we left behind. Our first stop was a busy town near the coast. It had tall buildings, traffic lights, and people who never smiled. We stayed in a hostel that smelled like wet towels. I spent the days looking for work while my sisters tried to help. Mira was always good with people. She could speak with anyone and make them laugh. Elin was quieter. She read books and kept her thoughts to herself, but her drawings were beautiful. She once drew a picture of our old village and gave it to me. I cried when I saw it. After 2 weeks, I got a job in a small kitchen near the bus station. The owner needed someone to clean and help prepare meals. It paid little, but they gave me food and let me take leftovers home. Every night, I returned with a small bag of warm bread and soup. We shared it in silence, sitting on the floor of the hostel room. It wasn't much, but it felt better than the cold dinners we used to eat in our foster home. One evening, the cook showed me how to make a potato stew. He was busy and tired, and he didn't speak much, but he had kind eyes. When I got home that night, I wrote the recipe down in a notebook. Over time, I started writing more recipes. I remembered meals from our childhood and wrote them too. Food became something more than survival. It became memory. It became love. But life in the town was not easy. Mira wanted to study hospitality, but we had no money. She started working in a small cafe, but the owner often shouted at her. Elin found part-time work in a bookstore, but the shop closed after 2 months. I wanted to help them both, but I was already working long hours. Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Mira met a couple from abroad who were traveling through the country. They were friendly and curious, and they asked about her life. She told them about our journey, our dreams, and our shared wish to find a better place. Before leaving, they gave her a card. It had the name of a woman who ran a cultural center in another city. "She helps people like you," they said. We didn't know if it was real or safe, but we had nothing to lose. A few weeks later, we used the last of our money to travel to that city. The center was small, painted in yellow, with a garden full of sunflowers. The woman who greeted us had short gray hair and warm hands. She listened. That was the first surprise. She asked nothing about the past. She only asked, "What would you like to do if you could choose anything?" I didn't know how to answer at first. I had never thought about what I wanted, but Mira said she wanted to learn how to organize events, and Elin said she wanted to keep drawing. I looked at the garden and said, "I want to cook food that makes people feel safe." We stayed in the city for 6 months. The center helped us find places to live and offered simple classes. Mira learned to organize small community events. She helped plan a food market. Elin volunteered at a youth center and painted a mural on one of the walls. I worked in a small kitchen at the center, and I kept writing recipes in my notebook. One day, the woman who ran the center handed me a small box. Inside was a collection of handwritten recipes. "These are from my grandmother," she said. "She cooked during the war. She fed strangers and friends. You remind me of her." I held the box in my hands for a long time. It felt like more than paper. It felt like a gift of trust. I started to add my own recipes to the box. I cooked from it every day and watched people smile when they ate the food. I didn't know it at the time, but that box would become something much bigger later. After 6 months, Mira said she wanted to go abroad. She had met someone from a youth exchange group and wanted to try working in another country. Elin also wanted to leave. She had found an art program for young adults in a different city. I was scared to say goodbye, but I knew I couldn't hold them back. We cried the night before they left. I made stew from the old recipe and added new spices I had learned to use. We sat outside the center, watching the stars and listening to the quiet sounds of the city. They promised to write, and I promised to keep the recipes safe. When they left, I felt empty. The room we once shared felt too quiet. I went to work, came home, and cooked. Days passed, then weeks. I missed them more than I expected. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. One evening, I sat with the recipe box and looked through the notes. I saw a mix of old and new, my grandmother's stew, my foster mother's bitter soup, my own soft bread. Then I had an idea. I would make something for those who had nothing. A warm plate, a soft corner, a place to rest. That was the beginning. I started with 5 chairs and no table. I found the chairs outside a closed school. They were scratched, old, and 2 of them had broken legs. But they still had shape, still had use. I cleaned them with warm water and soap, then carried them to the small corner of the community center where I worked. I placed them in a circle, near the window that faced the street. I didn't know if anyone would come, but I decided to try. I cooked lentil soup from one of the grandmother's recipes in the box. It was simple, just carrots, onions, garlic, and spices. but it filled the room with warmth. I put the pot on the windowsill and wrote a short note on paper. Soup and bread, free, 5:30. At first, no one came. I sat by the window and waited. I didn't feel disappointed, only quiet. I had food and I had time. But then, just before the sky turned dark, a man walked by and stopped. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. I smiled and pointed to the pot. He nodded and walked in. He sat without speaking, and I served him a bowl. He took it with both hands like it was something precious. He ate slowly, silently. When he finished, he looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." That was all. Then he left. The next evening, he returned. This time, he brought a woman with him. The woman brought a small bag of apples. She placed them on the windowsill without a word and sat down. I served soup again. They ate, smiled, and left. The apples stayed behind. By the end of the week, 4 people came. One brought bread. Another brought tea leaves. A boy came one evening and asked if he could draw something on the wall. I said yes. He painted a small orange cat on the bricks. It had big eyes and a warm smile. The circle of chairs grew. I found more outside shops, next to bins, under broken street signs. I fixed what I could. I bought a second-hand table. It had no legs, so I placed it on bricks. It stood low but strong. We placed food, tea, and fruit on it each evening. No one asked questions. No one gave names. We shared what we had. One evening, a young woman arrived with a suitcase. She looked tired, like she had not slept in days. Her hands were shaking when she took the bowl of soup. After she ate, she looked at me and said, "Do you ever wonder where you would be if no one helped you?" I nodded. She opened her suitcase. Inside were old books, a sketch pad, and a small green scarf. She took out the scarf and gave it to me. "It belonged to my sister," she said. "She died last winter. She always gave away what she had. She would have liked this place." I didn't know what to say. I folded the scarf and placed it inside the recipe box that night. It was more than fabric. It was a memory. Weeks turned into months. I worked during the day in the center kitchen and returned each evening to the circle of chairs. Sometimes we had soup. Sometimes rice and beans. Sometimes only tea. But every evening, someone came. And every time, someone brought something small to give. During this time, I started writing letters to Mira and Elin. I told them everything. About the soup, the chairs, the table without legs. About the people who gave more than they had. I didn't know if they would answer, but I wrote anyway. It felt like speaking into the quiet. Then, after 3 months, a letter arrived. It was from Elin. Her words were simple, but full of feeling. She had joined an art program in a seaside town. She was painting murals on the walls of old shops. "It's not much," she wrote, "but when I paint, I feel like I belong." She sent a small photo. It showed a wide blue wall with painted birds flying across it. At the bottom, she had written, "For Lena, for the ones who fly late but arrive safely." I cried when I read it. Not the loud kind of cry, just tears that came slowly and would not stop. I placed the letter next to the scarf in the recipe box. A week later, Mira called me. Her voice was bright, but there was something soft behind it. She was in another country now, working at a cultural event center. She was helping organize a winter festival. "I told them about your soup nights," she said. "They want to try it here." I didn't know how to respond. The circle had started from 5 broken chairs and a pot of lentil soup. And now it was growing in ways I never expected. Then something happened that changed everything. One evening, as I prepared soup, I noticed the boy who had painted the cat on the wall was watching the street. He seemed nervous. I asked if he was okay, and he said a group of men had been coming around, asking people questions and making them uncomfortable. I didn't understand at first, but then I learned that someone had reported the community center to local authorities. They said we were giving food without a license, that we were attracting the wrong people. It was a small group with loud voices, and they didn't want our circle to exist. I felt afraid. I had no papers, no power, and no money to fight back. The center where I worked couldn't protect the space. One day later, we were told to stop all evening gatherings. "Until the problem is resolved," they said. That night, I sat alone in the room with the empty table. No food, no visitors, just silence. I didn't sleep well. I walked in circles, thinking about what to do. I remembered our foster mother's house, where silence was normal. But this silence felt different. It wasn't cold. It was full of voices that had no place to go now. I opened the recipe box. I looked at the old notes, the scarf, the letter, the photo. I felt a strange kind of anger. Not the loud kind. It was quiet, heavy, and full of love. I couldn't let the circle disappear. It wasn't mine to end. The next morning, I walked through the city with a notebook in my hand. I visited small shops and cafes. I spoke to anyone who would listen. I asked if they had a corner, a table, or even one evening a week where people could sit and share a meal. Most said no. A few said maybe, but one small bookstore said yes. The owner was an old woman who wore red glasses. She said, "I've seen you before. You're the girl with the soup." I smiled and nodded. She gave me a key and said I could use the back room every Thursday evening. That was the new beginning. It wasn't big, but it was enough. We started again with 3 chairs and 1 table. The boy painted another cat on the wall. A woman brought tea leaves in a glass jar. A man brought his guitar. A girl read poems from a notebook. And the soup returned. When I wrote to Mira and Elin again, I told them about the bookstore, about the second beginning, about the people who still came. I wrote, "It's not magic. It's something better. It's real. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen, stirring the soup. I looked out the window and saw a group of people waiting in the cold. Some I knew. Some were new. They weren't smiling. They were waiting. And I realized something important. We had all come from places that didn't want us. But now, we were building a place that did. That winter, the city was colder than usual. The bookstore room where we held our soup evenings had no heater, but no one complained. We wore scarves, gloves, and thick coats. People brought warm blankets and extra socks. Someone donated an electric kettle, and we made hot tea while we waited for the soup to finish cooking. The smell of onions and garlic mixed with cinnamon and cardamom filled the air. Even with the cold, it felt like something special. One evening, I was walking home after our gathering when I passed the old community center. The windows were dark. A paper was taped to the front door, but I didn't stop to read it. I knew what it said. The center was closed now. The government had removed its funding, and the staff had all left. A place that once held stories, hands, and hope was now empty. But I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else, something like strength. The people had not disappeared. They had followed the soup. They had followed the kindness. The circle had moved, not broken. When I got home that night, I found a letter waiting for me. It was from Elin. Inside the envelope, there was a small photograph. It showed her standing in front of a large mural. This one was different from the last. It had soft orange and blue colors, with shapes that looked like chairs and bowls, and in the middle, a table. Around it, faceless people reached toward each other. On the back of the photo, she had written, "A table is not made of wood. It's made of hands." That line stayed with me for days. I wrote it on the wall of the bookstore room. People asked me what it meant, and I smiled. "It means you don't need legs to stand strong," I told them. Soon after that, Mira came back to visit. She had been living abroad for a year, working at the festival center. She had learned how to plan cultural events, manage small projects, and speak in 3 languages. But she said something felt missing. "I was organizing spaces," she said, "but I missed being in one." When she stepped into the bookstore that Thursday evening, I saw her eyes fill with tears. She looked at the soup pot, the painted cat, and the 3 chairs in the corner. "It's small," I said, "but it's real." Mira smiled and nodded. "It's perfect," she said. After the gathering ended that night, we stayed behind to clean up. We drank the last of the tea and folded the blankets. Then Mira pulled out a small notebook from her bag. "Let's do something," she said. "Let's write a guide for others who want to start what you started." We worked on it for the next 3 months. It wasn't a big book, only 20 pages. But inside were recipes, stories, drawings from Elin, and simple steps for building community spaces. We called it The Table Without Legs. We printed copies at the local library and left them in cafes, shops, and youth centers. We didn't know if anyone would read them, but we hoped someone might. A few weeks later, we received a letter from a woman in a town we had never visited. She said she found our book on a park bench. She had started a small soup circle in her neighborhood. "I didn't know how much people needed each other," she wrote, "until we sat down and shared a meal." More letters came. One from a man in another country. One from a teenager living with his grandmother. One from a group of university students who turned their classroom into a shared kitchen once a week. Each time I read those letters, I felt something grow inside me. Not pride, something gentler, like peace. Elin returned that spring. She had finished her mural project and said she wanted to stay closer for a while. She brought her drawings and started teaching children at a nearby school. On the weekends, she painted in the bookstore room. Her murals filled the walls slowly, quietly. One showed a hand holding a spoon. Another showed a scarf flying like a bird. They weren't loud. They were kind. That summer, we held our first open festival. It was simple. One long table, in a garden, old chairs from the street. Music played from a phone. Soup cooked over a small fire. People from different places sat side by side. Children ran between the chairs. A woman read a poem. A man gave out old books. Everyone gave something. No one paid. That night, as the sun set, I looked around the garden. I saw Mira laughing with a group of volunteers. Elin helping a small girl tie her shoe. The boy who painted the cat helping to clean the dishes. I saw the scarf, now part of a mural. The recipe box, still full. I felt the air, full of warmth and stories. And then I understood something I had never said aloud. We were no longer the girls from the foster home. We were not lost, not waiting, not small. We were women who had built something, from nothing, from chairs without legs, from soup, from love. My name is Lena, and I had no table, but I had memory, hands, recipes, and sisters. And together, we created a place that gave everything we once needed, not money, not magic, but safety, connection, and a chance to begin again. Now, when someone asks me what we do, I say this: we give people a place to sit. We give them a bowl to hold. We give them space to breathe. And in that space, they often find what they had forgotten. Not soup, not tea, but themselves. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.